Jaz, you're a nuclear engineer from Perth. Thank you so much for taking some time out to sit down with me and to help answer some of my questions about nuclear. My first question is, you're a nuclear engineer from Perth. We keep getting told Australia doesn't have a nuclear industry. So what is going on?
So Australia has been doing nuclear for over 70 years. We're a small industry, we're growing, and we actually get a lot of talent from overseas as well. So there is a nuclear industry in Australia. It needs to grow, and we're trying to grow it for AUKUS, but it has so much potential to grow even bigger because I'm pretty biased here. Nuclear science and engineering is pretty phenomenal. It's pretty interesting.
And we are a good nuclear industry too. ANSTO, our nuclear medical centre in Sydney, they're world renowned, aren't they?
Yep, so they produce a lot of the world's nuclear medicines. They also dope silicon that's used in high-end electronics. So you're talking about fast jets and high-speed trains that have to be precise and accurate. They dope the silicon that's used in those microprocessing boards. They also do a heap of research with neutrons, but we also have the world's best regulators in ARPANSA and ANSTO, who other countries seek their support to help in their nuclear regulation system. So we're good at it.
So we've already got regulators, we've already got scientists and engineers, we've already got a nuclear reactor. Why is there such a thing against nuclear energy?
Because we've had it banned. And when you ban something, you automatically think it's bad. And so I think it's kind of led us down this false path in Australia that we automatically think nuclear is bad when there are so many amazing opportunities where nuclear used peacefully. I'm not talking about nuclear weapons here. That's bad and we don't want to promote that. But when we talk about nuclear power and energy, we've just missed out on that conversation because we've had that door shut legally for such a long time.
It's crazy. Now, I have two portfolios. My shadow portfolios are water and emergency management, and I have questions about both because these are questions I get asked, and it would be great to hear from an expert. But one of the key ones is water. When people say, we can't have nuclear power because it uses too much water and we're the driest continent in the world, and I know that our water resources are scarce. So how much water does nuclear need?
So there's a real misconception in Australia that nuclear consumes water in its process. A nuclear reactor is much like a coal-fired power plant. It is a kettle attached to something that boils water, spins a turbine, creates electricity. So there's water used in the turbine part to generate steam, which is condensed and returned back into its water source. That's how we currently do it. Coal-fired plants, nuclear is the same. That water does not go into the reactor core. It doesn't touch the nuclear material. It is a completely separate loop. And University of New South Wales did a study earlier this year, and the figures they came up with were nuclear power plants used about the same as a coal-fired plant. It's not consuming any more water than we already use.
So the Coalition's policy to put nuclear reactors at the site of retiring coal-fired power plants is sensible because they can just use that water licence.
Yes, exactly. There's no real change to the water there. The exciting part about nuclear is there's a couple of advanced reactor designs that are looking at other sources for cooling, so it's not reliant on water. So in the future, and we're talking 10, 15, 20 years, we can look at things like gas-cooled reactors, molten salt reactors, that will allow us to be able to put reactors in sites that don't have great access to water because they've got other mechanisms to cool.
That's really interesting. The other question I get with water is the concern that somehow the nuclear reactor is going to leach into the underground water aquifers.
No, so the reactor vessel itself has several layers of containment, and this is to prevent radioactive release into the atmosphere and into groundwater. These layers are quite thick and they're designed to withstand a lot of different activities. seismic activity, flooding activity, any other natural disasters, bushfires, which is something we're concerned about here in Oz. That reactor containment vessel ensures that the reaction stays within that part and doesn't leach out into the environment. And there are several sensors and mechanisms to ensure that that has maintained its integrity.
That is the perfect segue to my other portfolio, which is emergency management.
Yeah.
And so, I am, as a shadow minister, I watch very closely for bushfires, floods, how the government responds and what we would do. So you're saying that modern day nuclear reactors can withstand or are built to withstand things like floods and bushfires, which are very common in Australia.
Yeah, definitely. So there is a technical guide that the International Atomic Energy Agency releases to all countries around the world, which gives specifications of what levels of design features a nuclear power plant needs to abide to for seismic activity, flood activity, fire activity, cyclone. And to be honest, in Australia, besides bushfire and potential flood, things like earthquakes are not very common here, and seismically we're pretty stable. So there are technical ways that we can design a reactor to withstand all those issues. The real key in emergency management at a nuclear power plant site is how do you ensure all the passive safety features are there and active to cool a reaction when you want to kill the reaction off. And that's where a lot of the newer reactors have invested that technology into. How do you make it safe, make it cool, so you can walk away if there's a fire, flood, whatever, you can walk away and that plant is staying safe and cooling without any human intervention.
That's very reassuring. I have noticed since the Coalition announced their nuclear plans, and obviously you've seen one of our sites is in the Hunter, and I am reading more and more often about even the slightest earth tremors in the Hunter. Ooh, Hunter's had an earthquake, you can't put a nuclear reactor here.
Yeah.
What level, Japan has earthquakes. What level sort of earthquakes can modern day reactors withstand?
So you mentioned Japan, and California's on huge fault lines as well. Both have nuclear power plants. So there's also another design you can use whilst building nuclear power plants in seismically active areas, which Australia isn't really, where the power plant actually sits on its own plates that vibrate and shake with the earthquake, so that the reactor's not reliant on the ground. It's got its own plates that it shakes on with the earthquake and stays safe. And so there are engineering solutions that already exist, and not just in nuclear power plants. Lots of other buildings that need to be seismically rated use these pads to help support in the event of an earthquake. So from a technical perspective, there are solutions, and countries have been doing this already, and countries that have way more threat of pretty significant earthquakes than we do.
So it sounds a lot safer than the public commentary would have you believe. And my understanding as well is some of the most recent issues that some nuclear reactors have actually been nothing to do with the reactor and everything to do with other externalities.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a really great website called Our World in Data that gets all the data from around the world. And there's one graph they do that's about safety in the energy industry. And nuclear is by far the safest in the energy.
Even safer than coal.
Way safer than coal. So, fun fact, if you work at a coal-fired plant, you're exposed to more radiation than you ever would be if you worked at a nuclear power plant.
How does that happen?
Coal has radon naturally occurring, and so you're exposed to radon all day, every day. But we don't talk about that because that's just something we're comfortable dealing with. And so nuclear, because it's so highly regulated, all these safety factors are measured, monitored, reported on. And so, in fact, people that work around nuclear power plants and nuclear submarines are exposed to less radiation than everyone else who's working in regular buildings. Like in here, there's so much granite, we're exposed to more radiation in here. then we would be at a nuclear power plant.
And I have read, and I'm not going to name the products because I love my farmers and I love their produce, but there is radiation in a lot of the foods we eat, fruit and vegetable, and she did it.
Bananas.
I love bananas. Still eat bananas. They're very good for you.
But that's radiation is what has got us to survive on Earth. It is naturally occurring and it allows cells to grow and mutate, and that's what allowed us to turn from apes to humans.
I thought that was our opposable thumbs.
Well, that's how evolution works. It's these slight mutations, and it's radiation that's allowed those sorts of things to happen. And so, without radiation, actually, we don't grow and develop, and we would find that we wouldn't grow taller every generation, and all those sorts of things. So it's some of those myths that you try to tell people that radiation is everywhere, and we shouldn't be terrified about it. It's understanding where it is safe and where it is not.
And clearly, in the energy industry, not only is it safe, but it is getting safer all the time.
All the time.
And we're not proposing to build any of the old-fashioned style nuclear reactors. We're proposing modern and even small modular in the right places.
Yeah.
And so they're going to be extremely safe, extremely stable, not use all our water, actually use the same or less water than coal, and allow us to keep our lights on.
Yeah, that's right. Every generation of reactor that's designed has got more passive safety features to take the human out of the loop, because if we learnt anything from Chernobyl, it was don't trust an overzealous engineer to push a reactor to their limits. Have safety factors that allow the reaction to stop and keep cooling safely. And we wouldn't build a 1960s Russian technology in Australia where there's so many amazing designs out there now.
Last question. Waste.
Yeah.
It's the dirty question that everyone wants to ask. I mean, I have concerns about how we deal with lithium batteries, but when we're talking about dealing with nuclear waste, again, there's the concern, if we bury it, will it just leach into the soil or the groundwater? But how much waste are we talking? Like, people are thinking there's going to be tons and tons of nuclear waste.
So nuclear waste is a term I don't really like because it's all radioactive waste.
Right.
So we already in Australia deal with radioactive waste. Every reactor type, including our research reactor, will have low-level radioactive waste produced every year. This is operational type materials, gloves, overalls, rags, things that are used to help service a reactor. A nuclear power plant produces about a shipping container's worth of this waste every year. It gets barreled up. It's low levels of radiation, has short half-life, so essentially it needs to be isolated for a period of time, and then it's regular waste like any other kind of waste. You then have intermediate level and high level waste, and that's the things people are more concerned about. You've got high levels of radiation, and when we talk about high level waste, you're talking about used fuel out of a reactor core. Now, these also have technical ways to deal with them. Intermediate level waste gets, in our case, we send our used fuel to France. It gets recycled. They take out the uranium, plutonium. They use that in other reactors because it still has energy left. So it powers French reactors. It takes out the other fission products that are not useful anymore and packages them up in what they call dry storage casks, big concrete casks that are designed to withstand train crashes, like high impact falls, so that they don't break and leach out. These are the ones that need to be buried underground. And for high level waste, again, they're slightly hotter than intermediate level waste. That's really where the differentiator is. It has decay heat. After it's been cooled in a water pond, it gets put in a dry cask as well, and then they get stored underground. There are solutions to do that. The thing is, it requires governments to make decisions that last generations, and so a lot of due due diligence needs to occur to make sure you're putting it in the right spot that is secure, that is able to sustain a community to look after that site. And so there are ways we already deal with waste, and we will continue to deal with waste whether we get nuclear power or not.
And if we're going to have AUKUS, we're going to need to deal with waste.
Yeah, definitely.
Jaz, it has been fascinating. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions. I hope they've answered a lot of the viewers' questions as well. I really appreciate it. It's been fantastic to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.